Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Clean Energy Business Council, I would like to welcome you all once again to our 10th edition of the CEBC Annual Summit. We are joined today by leaders in the clean energy sector in the UAE and from across the region to discuss the most pressing issues and highlight the solutions required, with the aim of laying the groundwork for effective and action-oriented outcomes related to sustainable energy transition at COP28 in Dubai this year. We're honored to have our members and partners amongst the speakers and our attendees, and our delegates from leading organizations in both the private and public sectors, and we look forward to hearing your perspectives today. I would also like to take a moment to thank our sponsors, Standard Chartered Bank, Innova, Aqua Power, and Johnson Controls for sponsoring and supporting this event. So without further ado, I would like to welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. Rabia Ferroukhi, to give the keynote presentation under the theme of the new energy paradigm. Dr. Rabia is an international economic development expert, and she's currently the director of the Knowledge, Policy, and Finance Center at the International Renewable Energy Agency.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for having me with you today. Great, thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here and share with you some of our thoughts and my thoughts. As you know, I'm from IRENA, which is the International Renewable Energy Agency, and the mandate is to promote renewables in the world. Okay, thanks. So I was asked to speak about the new paradigm, and there are certain aspects that are new in the paradigm, but it's also, I think we all know now, an avoidable paradigm. As was just mentioned, for us, the bottom line is to decarbonize, and we need to do that much more quickly and than we have done in the past. So, as you all know, the energy sector is crucial because it's over 2/3 of total greenhouse emissions, and the pathway that we all need to take is one that when there's nobody that can be a free rider. We all need to be together to achieve that. And there are interesting studies about the consequences of not doing so. So for example, the World Economic Forum estimated that the economy would shrink by 18% of GDP if we don't take action to mitigate. That's by mid-century. In that sense, it's not for future generations, but for action today. Of course, we're blessed in this region to have the abundant resources, free of charge, and currently we have seen also that in the past few years, PV in the region was competitive with sources like oil and gas, etc. But other countries don't necessarily have the privilege that we have in the Middle East in terms of resources, in particular developing Africa, Asia, Latin America, have really carried the brunt of a highly unequal global economic system. And it's in those countries that we see no greater vulnerability to climate change and who are basically least prepared to adapt to it. And just to note, this is while the majority of historical greenhouse gas emission originate within developed industrialized countries, not in the developing world. So without going into the implications of the climate crisis, what we have done, let's say the good news is to showcase the fact that with a pathway that is compatible with 1.5, we are able to get, just stay where we are. Go back, please. Yeah, next. We have calculated the socioeconomic benefits from transitioning to the 1.5 pathway. And we do that by looking at GDP, at jobs, and at welfare. And we do that globally, but also regionally and at the country level. So the good news is that the benefits can accrue from an energy transition, but the most important aspect of that is the fact that we need a holistic policy framework. So you can go to next, please. And the holistic policy framework is important in particular as when you go and listen to discussions about the energy transition, most people speak about technology, about finance instruments, and we never link all the required policies to the fact that the energy sector is one layer of the transition or the transformation we're going through. It needs to be embedded in our economies, it needs to be embedded in society, and then this within planetary boundaries. And I think that going into many events and discussions, I think where we have failed for the moment is to keep those interlinkages. So, as we have heard already today, we actually have the solutions. Yes, I'll talk about hydrogen in a minute, but in reality, we do have the technology solutions. We actually even have the financing. I mean, if you look at many analyses, there is money out there. So I feel that we fail to look at the systemic aspects of this transformation, which are about economic structures, which are about the way international regulation has been set for several decades, that maintains the socioeconomic structures that we have at a state that cannot necessarily bring the greatest benefit to the energy transitions. So this framework, in order for it to bring the benefits that can accrue for the energy transitions, this is what we call a new paradigm. It's this holistic framework where the energy system is one of the layers. We need deliberate and targeted and well-designed policies, and they have to go beyond the energy, the renewable energy efficiency deployment policy to cover this sort of wider spectrum of policy areas that includes redistributive, labor market, industrial policies, as well as carbon prices, as was just mentioned, and international cooperation in the form of funds to the global south. I mean, when we say that, we're all in it together and, everybody has to do their part, that's true, but we are not starting, all countries are not starting from the same point. So there needs to be, especially when you look at historical responsibility, there needs to be international flows that goes to the global south. Just to give you one example of the required policy that need to accompany the energy transition, industrial policy is essential. And I'm just going to mention now that the US and the EU have just announced a few months ago, and for some of them a couple of weeks ago, that they will have many incentive programs for green industrialization. And obviously they want to seize the opportunities that arise along, for example, the renewable energy supply value chain, from all the way project planning to manufacturing, installation, etc. And we do work on this at IRENA, looking at the labor requirements, the material requirements, in order to take advantage of the supply chains. And as mentioned earlier, we have seen disruption in global supply chains. So there is this objective in many countries to localize value chains. But let's be honest, localizing value chains means industrial policies which for decades were not accepted. When India started local manufacturing with local content requirement, they were taken to court at WTO. Today, we saw last week, 2 weeks ago at the General Assembly of IRENA, John Kerry saying, yes, everybody should do industrial policy. So it's acceptable now. And what does Mr. Timmermans from the European Commission respond? Yes, we're also doing that. All we need to do is synchronize our policies. So we're synchronizing policies between the US and the EU when developing countries for decades have been trying to localize some of the value chains and were not basically allowed to. So why I'm giving this example is that because we keep on talking about technologies, but even when technologies are there, and they are there for the most part, we have international regulations that govern international commerce and international, let's say, world economic order that is not capable or hasn't been capable to allow majority of countries to benefit from the transition. So saying we're going to do renewables and energy efficiency and everything is going to be fine is not true. And plugging in renewables and energy efficiency into Africa is not going to make it. Because, and it's not a matter of money or governance or institutional capacity, etc. It's a matter of international rules and trade dependencies that have existed for decades. So when we talk about energy transition, that's why we had this holistic policy framework. You cannot just talk about energy and technology and incentivize certain, or introduce certain measures. You have to talk about how world economic governance is done and how we can really make everybody come on board. So basically, these are the supply chains we have for renewables. That's just an example of how we can localize, if not nationally, because sometimes the market size is not enough, then at least regionally, how everybody can try to benefit from the energy transition, so that let's say the winners of today's are not the only winners tomorrow. That also means that together with that, you also need education, training policies, etc. And that's how ultimately, by localizing, you will lengthen, deepen, and strengthen local supply chains everywhere, including in this region, which has obviously a great potential. So now, going back to the energy paradigm itself, that's another thing, another point I wanted to make. Of course, we have green hydrogen as a carrier of energy, and we hear a lot about it in the energy transition. Obviously, it offers great opportunities, in particular in hard to decarbonize industries, but we should remember also, and I think it was mentioned before, that there are limits for this carrier, and we need to make sure that we invest, that the political, let's say, and capital and the financial capital makes sense. So hydrogen is still expensive. It's difficult to transport. It requires additional transport infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. I think everybody knows that. But in particular, attention should be given to international trading, and how that's again related to trade relationships in general and how they're regulated. So, for example, in IRENA study, we showed that IRENA suggests that only 25% of the green hydrogen needed in 2050 will be internationally traded, and mostly in very short supply chains. So investment in international trading infrastructure may risk to result in stranded assets. Instead, green hydrogen can bring great opportunities for local industrialization for countries, particularly for countries in the global south, actually, that also benefit from large variable renewable energy potential. And actually, this could be in line with the 200 years old practice of industry moving where energy is cheaper. So to make the most of our energy resources, part and parcel of the new energy paradigm, we'll certainly need to be making careful and informed decisions about what type of energy works most efficiently, while leaving the least impact on our environment and our future generations, taking aside, of course, the idea that whatever looks green is green. So this is also something we will discuss, I hope, more at the COP28, where UAE is obviously taking over the presidency. And we really hope that it will catalyze some global action, but always keeping in mind that it's not just about the energy system, the transformation, it's much deeper, and we need to put that into account. One more point I wanted to add is that thinking about the energy transition is that our decarbonization path is not only about the kind of energy you use, but how we use it. And I would like to highlight again that the vast majority of historical greenhouse gas emissions, as well as the energy use that it has contributed to, has not been used by a majority of this world. Related to that, we have in our modeling exercise, we have really tried to, on the basis of historical responsibility and GDP per capita, we have tried to see how those funds can be channeled from the global north to the global south with some form of equity. But since today we're in the Clean Energy Business Council Annual Summit, we also need to consider that energy efficiency, our energy mix, and what we can do as international organizations, government agencies, businesses in this part of the world to reduce our energy and carbon footprint. And again, this is not for the sake of making efforts so that we can just tick a box. It's because in this part of the world will be really impacted massively from climate change. As was mentioned in the earlier presentation, our energy and water needs will only rise. I think as we stand here, many in this room working in the business, we also know that the opportunities related to green industries are enormous, and new energy industries, and as I saw, supply chains for clean energy, energy efficiency, provide an important area of growth. So by investing, I think, in our ability to do more with less and to leave a smaller footprint on our planet while creating jobs and more economic opportunities and a healthier environment, I think we can really this region can lead, as was mentioned earlier, rather than follow others. And with that, I'd like to hand over and wish you a very productive day. Thank you.